everyone. Welcome back. This is Needed Conversations with Ryan and Victoria Cole. So glad that you joined us for today's episode. We are so excited to be in the new series, and it's on communication.
That's right. And communication is an effective tool for marriages, but really any relationship. And so that's what this series is going to be dedicated to. So I want you to commit to staying with us over the next several weeks as we give you tools for communicating more effectively with your spouse. Yeah. We did a poll, right?
We did do a poll, and we actually have a page, Instagram page, solely dedicated for relationships, for dating and marriage. You can follow us at Moremost Forever. But we did a poll on the stories, and that was one of the top trending ones, was the how to communicate better with my spouse. And so we wanted to create these series to help you guys out and give you guys a lot of wisdom in regards to this, because that's something that we knew right away when we first got married. Is definitely a struggle. I think one of the things that somebody told me right before I got married was, if you would have given me like the best advice before marriage, and people were telling me like, learn to communicate. And I was like, why is that a big deal? I mean, I know how to talk and how to have a conversation, but it's different. It's very different when you actually get married and you understand that you are a man and a woman. You come from different cultures, different backgrounds. And then within that, you also are from a different subculture as well. Like, you have different upbringings. And so there's a lot of things that come into play when it comes to communication and understanding why your spouse says what they say, and how to also approach and actually speak to them proactively instead of reactively.
That's right. You know, we launched our Marriage Revival Tour.
Yeah, and it was really awesome.
It was amazing. We were in Atlanta, Georgia, and this was one of the questions that came up, talking about communication, as is oftentimes, because it feels like men and women speak a different language at times. Well, I was thinking about our marriage ministry, and one of the things that I think sets us apart from other marriage ministries, which are offering some amazing tools and strategies, but we add the supernatural side of marriage, right? That a lot of people don't talk about. And if you are filled with God's Spirit and you are a part of a charismatic movement, you believe in, revival culture and bringing heaven to earth, like, as it relates to your marriage, where does that come into play? Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking of the gifts of the Spirit, and one of them being the gift of tongues and interpretation. Mm-hmm. And I pray that often for us and for other couples, that God would give us as spouses the gift of tongues and interpretation. Men and women speak different languages. Let's just be honest. We might even be saying the same thing, but what we're hearing is different. Mm-hmm. And so when we were at our Marriage Revival Tour and brought up this question, we talked about our past and how we're from different cultures, right? Yeah. And what would you say the biggest struggle was for us communicating when we first got married?
Well, for us personally, it was because English was my second language, and some of the vocabulary that I've learned, I guess, over time, to me, they meant different things. Like, certain words meant different things. And so we always had to clarify. Like, Ryan was like, okay, so you're saying this word, and it's coming across very aggressive. Like, does this mean this to you? And I was like, no, it means this. And he was like, well, that's not what it means to me. And it's not to say that my viewpoint was wrong on that or his viewpoint was wrong on that. It's just what we grew up to understand it to be. And like I always say to people, when I first learned the English language, I actually translated in my mind back to my own language until I understood the culture that I'm living in and why people say what they say. And that is where I feel like God wants you to get to a place in your marriage where you come with an understanding of the other person, what their background is and why they say what they say. And I'm not saying that this is an excuse for abusive behavior, but what I'm saying is that you're going to learn each other's tendencies and why, your background and how you can better understand one another when you're having a conversation. You'll definitely have a better context. That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
And for us, she came from Ukraine, but she speaks perfect English. And when we got married, it wasn't a challenge with the natural language. It was in our unique approaches to the language, English language, right? Because in the Russian language, you don't need as much nuance in the words that you say because they have a more exhaustive vocabulary and have more words that express specifically and uniquely what you're trying to say. The Hebrew language is much like that too. I mean, there was in the Bible several different languages for love, agape, phileo, etc. And so you have our language, and she approaches it from a very specific way, and I approach it from a broad, nuanced way. And so things that would come off as very direct from her, I would have to clarify. And so I didn't get my feelings hurt. So I really understood what she was saying. And had we not had maturity, we would have probably allowed those things to fester into years of misunderstanding. But we chose to do the hard work, to wrestle with our language differences until we came to a mutual understanding. And I know how she approaches it. I don't always get it right, but I know how she approaches the language, and she knows how I as well, because I approach the language different probably than a northerner or someone living on the West Coast, because I'm a Southern boy from South Carolina. And, you know, we have certain cultural idioms. And so even if you are not from a different country, you are still going to have some sort of clash in culture as well as how you approach language. You could both be American, you could both be the same ethnicity, and you get in the household and realize that the way that his parents talk to one another was so different from the way that your parents talk to one another. Because it's not just about the language itself. Maybe he came from a family of screamers, and everybody was a loud voice and expressed themselves demonstratively, and she did not. They're going to have to come to terms with how they communicate so that he's not screaming at her and he thinks it's no big deal. You know, he may not be aggressively screaming, but he's passionate about what he's saying, right? And he raises his voice. She may feel that it's aggressive, but it's not. And vice versa. I've totally been in situations where I've seen it's the woman screaming at the man all the time, and he's kind of like with a Q-tip in his ear trying to like clear out the pain of this woman screaming at him. But that's her culture. That's where she came from. And they have to wrestle until they come to terms with what their new culture is going to be. And no matter what background you come from, you have to bring the best of your family and traditions and values and the way that you communicate. And he's going to have to bring the best of his. And when you come together, you're creating something new. We have a hybrid culture in our house, right? Mm-hmm. Everything from our kids, you know, love a bowl of borscht, but they also love some sausage biscuits and macaroni and cheese and the Southern culture foods as well. And you got to do the same thing in your home. Determine how does your spouse communicate and why. Say, why do you always feel like raising your voice when you talk? You know, what else would you add?
Yeah, one of the things that we mentioned at the marriage revival, which I think really resonated with people, is that most of the time we listen to respond instead of listening to understand. And when you come to the table with this kind of attitude every single time, it's going to feel like a miserable marriage because you're never going to come to an agreement. You're never going to understand that person at all because you've already made up your mind that whatever they're saying, you're filtering it through your lens. And to you, they're saying something else because you are not clarifying it. So one of the things that we have been, saying, especially in the heated moments, and those happen even in the most of the healthiest of relationships, and that's normal. But we actually would stop one another and say, so do you mean this whenever you're saying this? And a lot of times, I would rebuttal or he would rebuttal and say, no, that's not what I mean. Because, we, again, are filtering it through our own context. And it's like we're already getting ready to feel the attack of your spouse, even though they're just trying to express themselves and, what is truly going on and addressing the root problem of it. So, yeah.
Yeah, and communication goes beyond just words. It includes body language,
Yeah.
And when it comes to even screaming at one another and being aggressive with your body, when couples start to scream at one another, it's an indication that they both feel like they're not being heard.
Yes.
And then they probably use words that they really don't mean, but could cut to the core. And the thing about it is you can't take those words back, but you could clarify the context and the place of pain that you were in when those words were expressed and why you used them. And that helps rebuild trust. But inevitably, when you're screaming at one another, one of you will bring up, but you said such and such, and that hurt me, or that blah, blah, blah. And the other person will inevitably say, but I didn't mean it like that. Well, how did you mean it? And why did you use those words? Why did you choose those words? And we lean upon kind of common hateful language when we feel frustrated, especially if you come from a house where throwing insults was the norm, even if it came in a sarcastic kind of way. And you might have even associated insults with love. Like, that you're a part of this family. Like, you hold this name if you can take an insult and swallow it and be fine. But that's dysfunction. And it's not how a healthy marriage, should operate. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't have my head in the mud and think that you guys can't have, your own jokes and inside jokes and all of that with one another. But you really do have to be careful with how you use your language skills and the words that you're throwing at one another, because they do hold weight. Words hold weight and value, prophetic significance. And Victoria is absolutely right when she says that most people don't listen to hear, they listen to respond. And that means that you've entered into every communication setting with your spouse with your defenses up. Mm-hmm. That means you're combing through their words, looking for trigger words so that you can build an artillery of defense to respond and win the argument. Right. I wrote here, when you're listening to respond, that means you're looking for a response to defend yourself, and you're combing through their words looking for ammunition. Instead of stopping, putting your defenses down, because you're not in a war against one another, you're not fighting against each other, you're fighting to understand. And you point those weapons towards wrestling to understand where they're coming from, why they're saying what they're saying, and what they really mean. Because if you could get why they're saying what they're saying, then all of your problems would be solved. Because communication is how relationships move from level to level. And really, it has to do with intimacy. We talked about this in both of our marriage books, is intimacy is information. How much information are you willing to share with the other person? How deeply into your soul are you willing to dig and pull out and hand it over to that person? And know that the information that you give them is either going to be a weapon they use to defend you or a weapon they use to harm you. And whenever you open up your heart to someone, especially in marriage, that's building trust, and that is the risk that you take for the sake of intimacy and for the sake of oneness with your spouse. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I have two things that I would say are like one of the most important things to figure out about a person even before getting married. But if you've been married for a couple of years and you've been struggling with communication, two things finding out about your spouse. Are they an introvert or an extrovert? And what is their love language? And I know it may sound irrelevant, but like for me, I'm an introvert and Ryan is an extrovert. So one of the issues that we've been having is I need time, especially in a heated argument, to just think. And he wants to get it resolved right away. Well, if he kind of has his way and he keeps pushing and pushing and pushes, it actually pushed me over the edge many times. And so what we've learned over time is to give me space, and he is able to think clearly and I'm able to think clearly. And then we set time to actually talk through clearly without actually, me spouting things that I don't mean, because I need that time.
And it takes patience and discipline on my part, because I think that I have a touch of OCD in me, so I can be a bit of a control freak at times. So I got to really restrain myself because I want this to be resolved right now. I don't want this to wait.
But we've gotten really much better with it. I think he recognizes that I need space. And I think clearly when I do have some time, because I don't want to say things that I don't mean. And honestly, at that point, in the heated argument, because of my background and where I came from, I shut down in heated conversations, and it's like I have nothing in my head. I know it's hard for an extrovert to believe that, but it literally is. It's like it's hard. And the second thing that I was saying about the love language, understanding your spouse's love language can also help you understand how to approach them. For example, like Ryan's love language is words of affirmation. So I have to be very cautious about certain things that I say when I say them, because that's how he feels loved. And the same thing to me, although my love language is acts of service, when we are having those conversations and we're talking about, me doing certain things or not doing certain things, I feel attacked because I know that I'm displaying my love by, showing my acts of service. So those things are very important to understand with your spouse, because you will approach it a lot more carefully because you understand that's how they feel loved and appreciated.
Right. I hope that you're getting that, because that is a well of wisdom right there. If you understand your spouse's love language, it's not about knowing that so that you can express your love to them, which is important, but it also helps you to fight more strategically. Fighting in marriage is going to happen because you have two different perspectives, and that's not a bad thing. It actually adds a little heat to the relationship. That tension is good, but it's about learning how to fight well, and that is key, golden. For instance, words of affirmation is one of my primary love languages. So that means if she uses words that I feel like degrade me and my character as a person, it's going to hurt even deeper for me than it would a person whose love language is not affirmation. Right. And the same with her, and I'm just repeating this so you hear, her love language is acts of service. So if I'm saying to her that, this, and this is not happening and we need to tighten up the reins here or do this better, she feels as if her love is being rejected.
Right.
And so we have to both be mindful in how we approach the argument, but also each be mature and say, she's saying this for me. She's saying this, but I know she loves me and I need this critique.
Yeah.
That it's not painful. It's painful to hear when somebody tells you that something's wrong about you, that you need to fix this, but also, you need to hear it too. So I got to be mature, and the same with her. She's got to be mature.
That's right. And you know what? You can't have a proactive communication or even an argument or a dispute if those are the two things that you're ignoring, because what's happening is you're coming and you're either screaming at each other, it's flying over your head, you're feeling like your wife is nagging at you, or you're never coming to a resolution. But if you can at least agree on those two things and say, okay, she's an extrovert, I'm an introvert, or maybe you're both extroverts and you're just both
that
screamers.
Comes with its different set of problems.
And that means maybe y'all have to say, hey, time out. We both need to go our separate ways into our rooms and pray or take a walk, take a breather, because we're clearly going to be just screaming at each other and not coming across. There are people that way. So if you can get those two things communicated, that way, whenever you actually do have disputes or even just plain communication, you'll have a better and more effective way of communicating with your spouse, and you're going to see a really big difference.
Yeah, and I know we're throwing out a lot of bombs today, but this is kind of our introductory episode. So we are raising a lot of issues that we're going to be discussing in more detail. So that means you want to come back and listen for more. And I want to raise one more issue before we end today's podcast. And it kind of has to do with what Victoria says with love languages. But just taking a step back as an individual, look at your marriage and how you communicate with your spouse. Are all of your conversations negative? Do all of your conversation have some sort of confrontational element to it? Are you always just talking about your point of contention? Or are you also making an initiative to also shower your spouse with affirmation and maybe even speak into existence something that they're not currently, but that you believe God that they will become? Even if he is not the best husband right now, say to him, or even pray about him and say, you're a good husband. Call that into existence. My mom did that with my dad. And it's not a lying. It's not you also addressing the issues at hand, but you're addressing them. You're not ignoring them, but you're also saying, listen, I believe that inside of you, there's a good husband there waiting to emerge. I believe that inside of you, there's a good wife waiting to emerge. And when it comes to communication, the key is learning how to pray for your spouse, because those fall into line with how well you're going to effectively communicate with them. If you're not communicating well with your spouse, you need to increase your prayer time, how much you pray about them. And it's not just complaining. When it comes to communication, let's start with how we communicate with God. Your prayers is probably just a list of wants and needs and complaints. Mm-hmm. Same way you communicate with your spouse: wants, needs, complaints. Mm-hmm. But the Bible says to enter his gates with thanksgiving, enter his courts with praise. And we talk about the tabernacle being an approach for dating and marriage. So if you are going to start the conversation with your spouse, you need to evaluate whether or not there at some point in this week, you've affirmed them. You've showered them with love and words of praise. I'm not saying you should worship your spouse, but I'm saying you do need to affirm them and use as many positive words towards them as you have in negative communication as well. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I know this is the tip of the iceberg, and hopefully you were taking some notes and also going to apply it in your marriage. Don't just listen to this information and allow it to just fly over your head. Apply it. Have your spouse listen to this podcast. Talk it through. That way you guys are able to have effective communication versus reactive communication. But we're going to discuss this in other episodes as well. And if you have any questions in regards to communication, maybe some personal issues, you can definitely message us. Go connect with us at Moremost Forever, which is our Instagram page. You can message us and let us know, and maybe we'll mention you in our next episode.
If you don't want us mentioned, if you don't want mentioned by name, of course we won't.
We'll say anonymous, but we'll address your question. Yes.
Right. And of course, all things marriage and dating related, all of the resources you can find at moremostforever.com. And also, you can partner with this ministry and help us continue to spread our message and empower more couples and families with the gospel of the kingdom so that they can build healthy marriages and healthy homes. Right now, you probably don't know it because this podcast is well edited, but we've had to pause and address our children who are in the room as well. So we know what managing family dynamics is all about. So we're trying to help others as well and empower them to build those healthy families. So partner with us today and make sure you're subscribed wherever you're listening to this podcast. All right.
Join us next time. We have a new episode come out every Monday. We'll see you guys next time.
Bye-bye.